Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Chris Benoit review. Now, if you saw the first video, you'll see that I spoke roughly about how his life was and my own feelings and interpretation of what I've learned about him. And now this review is going to be his life as a person and my final thoughts of the entire thing of both videos. Now let's get into this. Chris Benoit is the person. Now, if anyone saw or has the video of Chris Benoit Hard Knocks, which I do have a copy of, you will see during most of the video, you'll see how he talks about his life in Ontario, Canada, how he wished he could learn how to be a wrestler because he saw the Dynamite Kid. He loved wrestling, but also you will notice what he always talks about, being a very quiet, by himself person. Now, people I've heard talked about him mostly as a wrestler, not really talking a lot on YouTube, but as the person of who he was and how he acted, not wrestling. Now, from what I've managed to at least get a bit of, as a person, when he was coming up into basically going to New Japan, and I believe he also wrestled in Mexico, he learned the business. He wasn't too good about it, but he really loved it. And eventually, after he goes into ECW and then goes into WCW, by the time he felt a little burnt out, from what I understand, by the time he goes into WCW, because of the politics there. And from what I know, he met his second wife there. And from what I can tell, from my perspective, of course I don't know the business. If you want to know the business, talk to the Off the Rope, well, not talk to the Off the Rope show, but you can go look at the Off the Rope show, and the people there, the Slug Daddy, Mr. Ralph, Tasteless Tony T, they know the business. You could email them and ask them questions. I don't think they'll be able to tell you all the answers, because it is obvious they know people in the business, they know the business. I can't tell you if they'll tell you about the business. You're going to have to do the research yourself, but they could point you in some ideas. But essentially, in his marriage, eventually to a woman that he's with, I don't really know her name. I didn't really do that much detail about this. In the more videos, I'll try to do more better, but by the time he reached WWE, from what I understand, I believe he was already married to the woman that unfortunately took the life of. It was very difficult for him, particularly after he broke his neck, and it was, by my understanding and perspective, the schedule he held, because I'm saying this very clearly as a maybe above average fan. I don't believe I'm a mark or smart mark. I don't believe I'm even close to that. I still have a lot to learn if I want to become one. But as an above average fan who now knows a lot more about the business than he originally did when he used to watch it, and I'll say it truthfully, I know people may chuckle at this. When I was younger, I didn't know much about the business. I even thought it was real at some points. At the time I was very naive and basically really naive. I didn't know the business of things. But essentially speaking, as far as I'm concerned, at that time, I didn't know anything. But knowing now what I didn't know then, what I've noticed about Chris Benoit and about a lot of wrestlers, in many cases, if they're very passionate about the business and they put themselves out there, sometimes they go too far with it. And I'm saying this for Chris Benoit. He truly gave everything for the business. He broke his neck severely and was working with it for years. And he had strenuous problems with his first marriage. I don't know how it ended, but his marriage ended. He had about 2 or 3 children from that marriage, because you can see about 3 children, I believe, on the mat in WrestleMania 20. That was his current child that unfortunately took the life of, and 2 other children. That showed he had more children. But essentially speaking, what happens is this. Many cases, wrestlers who are really good about it and really passionate about it, not just about trying to make the money, but really love the business, they push too hard on themselves and in their marriages. In this case with Chris Benoit, he was so passionate about his love for wrestling that he went too far with it. He pushed too far. And unfortunately, it costed him everything. And what do I mean by that? Simply put, Bret Hart himself said in more than a few interviews that the WWE, not saying that other promotions don't do this, but I believe the WWE does the worst. In many cases, you have a contract wherein many times you may have a 5 or 10 year contract. You're required in many cases to work more than 200 to 300 days a year. Now, people will say, oh, that's not so bad. Yes, it is in many cases, because with Bret Hart, I believe he said he worked almost 319 days of one interview. And that is a lot of years with a lot of days. And understand, wrestlers do not stay in the same state in many cases. They don't even stay in the same if it's auditorium or an arena. They don't. Many cases they'll move around in the state and then they leave the state. Sometimes they don't even stay in the same state. The WWE, many cases, will get a venue that's places where they're going to go and wrestle in an arena, and then when they're finished with that arena, they move on to the next arena in another state. They jump from state to state to state to state. And in many cases, many wrestlers don't even have time to rest, to recover. In many cases, many wrestlers, and this is what people don't get, casual fans, more above fans, way above me, they get it that these wrestlers do get hurt when these matches get done. No matter if they're scripted, which they are, they work it out beforehand, and you can see in some cases they're talking to each other while they're in the ring, trying to figure out what they want to do. In some cases they just go with it and they won't talk to each other because they'll just actually wrestle, but in many cases they are scripting this, and in some cases they can really get hurt. And they must continually be, well, basically when they're hurt, they must continue working even if they're hurt. If they're severely injured, they're out, unless they'll continue being severely injured, if they can handle it and try and work out through their contract. But essentially speaking, they'll continue being hurt. And as time goes on, that builds up on them. In many cases, many of them take medication. Many of them are prescribed medication. Some of them won't even be prescribed it. They'll try and get something to try and supplement for it. There's some wrestlers who drink. Some wrestlers who did cocaine. Some wrestlers who do something else. Like with Eddie Guerrero, he had a severe drinking problem, but also he took steroids. And unfortunately for Eddie, he, sadly, when he finally stopped drinking, when he finally stopped taking the steroids, and he worked so hard, and Chris Benoit himself said it, that he was an inspiration to him, that he worked out his problems. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack and died in his hotel in 2005. And I believe that was one of the things that pushed Chris Benoit over the edge. Now, I know many people will say right now that hey, how can you say that? Especially not bringing up the fact of the brain damage information. I'm not going to really talk about the brain damage information. I can, but essentially speaking, a lot of people don't believe that his actions were all directly the results of brain damage because of all the videos I've seen. So I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to stick with the heavy work as well as for the steroids, in which everyone knows that steroids do damage your body severely, as well as can damage your brain. It can cause you to have many strange thoughts, including suicide, and be extremely enraged in many cases. It's not uncommon for people who've had it. And it was stated that he was taking monthly a year's worth of steroids from a doctor that, for what I understand, was arrested and put in jail for that. But what I'm saying right now is this, wrapping this up. Chris Benoit, the man and the wrestler. As a wrestler, he was one of the all-time greats. He would have gone into the Hall of Fame, of any Hall of Fame, for all the hard work and determination and passion he had. There is no problem with that. But he made one of the most serious mistakes of sacrificing too much for the love of that sport. There's nothing wrong with loving the sport, but there is a point, at least from my perspective, that you only can go so far with it, because once you notice that something's going wrong, and understand that you love what you do and you're making great money on top of what you do. It's hard not to realize something is going wrong. Look at Kurt Angle. He decided when he had an interview that was on YouTube. I'll see if I can try and find it. But he pretty much said, I was getting badly burnt out, and I realized the best option for me was going to TNA. It was a less stressful situation, less days. It's easier for me. I'm not saying that he didn't do it for politics. I'm not doing that. I'm not saying how politics are played in wrestling. I know it's there. I'm not saying Chris Benoit wasn't a part of it either. In some form or fashion, might be a little, might be a lot. Only thing I'm saying is that when some wrestlers can notice it getting really bad, they can get out. It'll be hard for them in their contracts. It'll be hard because they love the sport, either to quit the sport entirely or go to another type of promotion like TNA or ROH and try not to go so far with it. But in many cases, some of them just don't see it until it's too late. And unfortunately with Chris Benoit and the people, like I said, that was on Larry King Live, all those people just did not see it. They knew that he loved his children. And I'm saying this clearly, not to try and just completely exempt him from what he did and call him innocent because of the roids, and call him innocent because some people will say, yes, there was brain damage, why don't you include that? I'm saying this. By the time you realize that you're hurt in this business we're talking about, it reaches a point where you have to decide to pull out to save your health and maybe your marriage and your life, or you stay in it and see if you can work it out. But in many cases, it can be very dangerous for you and you can lose it. Unfortunately, Chris Benoit went over the edge. Everyone who knew him as a great man in the wrestling community for wrestling. Doesn't matter what promotion. They knew he was a great man. He was good at his job. As a person, they all knew he was a kind, caring man who was very quiet and loved his family. He loved his family. He didn't hate his wife and his kid that he took the life of, who I understood had problems with dwarfism, I believe they call it, and was supposedly he was giving him growth hormones. I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying he did the right things when it came supposedly with his wife's domestic violence allegations. I'm not saying it was right for giving his son growth hormones. I'm not saying it's right for what he did to his wife and his son and himself, taking the lives of all of them, including himself. What I'm seeing is an objective, clear view of what Chris Benoit did as a wrestler and as a person, and this is what it came down to. It came down to this. As a wrestler, as I said before, he would be considered, if he hadn't had his record white clean right now, if he was alive, he would be considered a clear 100% Hall of Famer. As a person, he was a damn good person that just went too far in the business. And instead of pulling out, like some do, if they even have a chance to notice it, he didn't. And no matter if he got brain damage due to all the injuries he received or the steroids, and putting in exactly as I said before about the heavy, strenuous schedule that the WWE or any promotion gives. But the WWE is the worst. He went too far, it was too much for him, and it took his life. And he took the lives of his family. It's wrong what he did. He killed 3 people, including himself. It's bad, but you know what? This is what happens in the business. It is a very difficult business, and I'm hoping people understand this. This business is so hard. You do something you love, but it's always extremely difficult to know when to get out when it's time. And when you finally notice it, if it's too late, you can end up either dead without harming someone, or in this case with Chris Benoit, he harmed people. And it's so terrible and such a big loss. I hate to see it myself. I was married once, had a son, but still, it's bad. So I thank you very much for Zane's view. I'm hoping to give more videos. I hope you like this one. Subscribe up above. Comment down below. I'll do whatever if you don't like it or like it. But essentially, I hope you like it. Have a good day.